and welcome to another evening of frank conversation on hard copy, reaching you from Channels Television Studio in Lagos. When the top floor of a school building on Mercy Street, Itafaji, Lagos Island, collapsed in 2019, it was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions as 20 people, including children, died, while many more were injured. This is just one of the many tragedies from building collapses in Lagos, the nation's commercial capital. With around 23 million inhabitants, Lagos bears the burden of much of the building collapse incidents and has recorded yet another on number 24 Ibadan Street, Ebute Metta, where at least 10 people died just a few days ago. We share some of that concern on hard copy today as we pick the mind of an industry expert on causes and solutions. Welcome to the program. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. My guest today is a former Commissioner for Physical Planning and Urban Development in Lagos. He is also the current National President, Nigeria Institute of Town Planners, Mr. Ayinde. Welcome to Hard Copy.
Good evening, Bukola. Good evening, viewers.
And thank you for coming on the program, even at such short notice.
It's a privilege.
Yeah. I'm hoping that we can have a productive conversation in spite of the circumstances, rather sad one, of yet another building collapse in Lagos, where about 10 or maybe 11 persons died. There are conflicting reports about the number of casualty. Well, let's start this way, Mr. Ayinde. A report quoted by the Nigeria Institute of Estate Surveyors and Valuers says 59% of collapsed buildings in Lagos in 2019 were existing structures, while 41% were under construction. If I'm right, this means that modern engineering is either in jeopardy or is not impressive in the light of the circumstances. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think a good place to start is to sympathize with the families of those who were lost.
Indeed, yeah.
In the recent collapse and previous collapses anyway. Now back to your question. Engineering has always been engineering. And I must say that engineering has improved by the day. So we can't say that modern engineering is failing. I think when we see failures, we should address the whys, the whats, and the hows. It will point to what is happening in our society. And I can tell you that it's probably the same engineering that is being used in other places that is being used here. So we really need to investigate what is happening. So it's not
41% is quite a number.
Yeah, I agree with you that they are under construction. So, but that's not the failure of engineering. Most of the collapses we have investigated are more of the failure of man than of engineering.
But the same man constructed existing structures, a lot of which have stood the test of time over the years, even more than current structures. How do you explain that?
Under different circumstances, under different values, under different approach to ethics. One of the things we said while we were investigating the Ikoyi collapse was the fact that collapses are rooted first in the collapse of values. That's the value to human life. Doesn't seem as if it makes any difference when we hear of building collapses. It's like we are running statistics. We even want to know which is the highest. So, but if we attach value to life, we will not even want to lose one person because that's a human resource that Nigeria can never recover from. It's also rooted in the collapse of morals. Things have changed. People look more for profit than for excellence. They put more emphasis on things than on people. and then collapse of ethics. We see that people do not want to play by the books anymore. Whenever you fall short of any of those three, what you have in your hands are collapse of buildings.
I'm glad you talked about values, and you headed the panel of the Tribunal of Inquiry into the Ikoyi building collapse. We'll get there. Regulation and enforcement, is critical to safe habitation of all purposes. That brings us to the Building Control Agency. Well, perhaps LABCA will be under scrutiny now because we're in Lagos State, but building control agencies across board are charged with enforcement of building control regulations and to regulate and inspect all building works and certify various stages of building constructions and keep record of same. With the number of collapses that we have, why isn't the Building Control Agency pulling its weight? Evidently, they are not if we have this number.
Now, investigations have shown that there could be many reasons. First is the focus of building control agencies themselves. When the idea was mooted, incidentally, I was the commissioner
at the time,
given the assignment to formally establish the Lagos State Building Control Agency. And one of its primary objectives was to monitor the process of construction, to ensure that the right ratios of aggregate to sand, to cement, to water was being done, to ensure that the right diameters of reinforcement bars were being maintained, to ensure that the qualified professionals, artisans and craftsmen were on site. But it seemed that the agency or a staff focused more on enforcement. I liken it to when a policeman or a law enforcement agent is supposed to prevent you from driving into a one-way road. But that officer is just standing by to wait for you to get in there. So rather than notify you that you're about to enter into a road that is one way, he waits for you to enter and say, hey, I catch you. So I think it has been more appealing to wait for people to contravene, to see them go against the plans that were approved for them, rather than check whether the right measures of materials were used. And with time, we have lost grip with producing quality. We have just faced enforcement. Enforcing what? I think some of these things are rooted in
revenue generation.
Yeah, because when agencies are given targets to meet, the only way you can meet targets is to wait for people to commit offense. So because if they did what was right, you are unlikely to generate revenue from there.
But then that's a huge lapse on the part of that government agency, for a construction of that magnitude to be handled with such, for regulation to be handled with such levity. As a town planner, what would you recommend, to prevent a reoccurrence of that, which evidently hasn't been done, if we went by the number of building collapses that have happened after that?
Now, one of the things we should first realize is that the staff of Building Control Agency are not sufficient to man the number of constructions going on per time. In Lagos State, there are about 40,000 construction sites going on simultaneously. I'm not sure Building Control Agency has up to 400 staff. So how do they monitor everywhere? So one of the recommendations that professionals have made over time, the tribunal re-articulated it it's not new, is to have certified private sector inspectors, professionals who have been tested, who are trusted to act as agents of government. So if Ayinde lives in Zone A, then I can be asked to monitor the constructions in Zone A. So when I wake up in the morning, I know that that is my assignment, and I know that my reputation is tied to that. And then I will give reports to the agency from time to time. I think that's one of the ways that we can get to do this.
I wonder if the act establishing the Building Control Agency goes further to stipulate forceful eviction of tenants or occupants of a building once the building has been marked distress. This is the reason I say this. Another building on Ibadan Street, Ebute Metta, which, seen in a viral video just a few days ago, would have been demolished but was spared because of resistance from residents or something, according to what we saw in that video. So that says or suggests that even as we speak, those occupants may still be in that building at their own peril. So is there anything in the act establishing the Building Control Agency, across board that suggests that they should forcefully evict occupants in that circumstance?
I think part of the law talks about defective and distressed buildings. And I will recall that even before I got to government, there was already a survey as at 2011, early 2011, of defective or distressed buildings in Lagos State. And as at that time, I think it was about 546 houses. And there was this policy of gradual removal and persuasive removal. Gradual by government itself, looking at how dangerous they are, and we were taking them off gradually. There are those that will appeal to the landlords that, you know what, this is the state of your house. If you allow this house to collapse, government will take that property from you. And some of them would even pay government to help them remove. So it was an assignment that needed educating the tenants themselves, because some people don't actually know the implication of a collapse. They give the excuse that cost of rents are high, but you must compare cost of rent and death.
So what we have is a policy of persuasive appeal to evacuate.
And we can forcefully eject. We've done it before.
But why hasn't it been done in this circumstance?
I won't be able to answer for the actors.
If it's a convention or a law, why hasn't it been invoked? Because, when it comes to government's activities of deploying land for real estate construction or for its own purpose, government is quick to quote the Land Use Act, and Morocco easily comes to mind. Ajelogo in Lagos, comes to mind, where residents were forcefully evicted who had been occupants of those areas for a long time. But why won't government take responsibility in such a circumstance, just to save lives, and it's just a few occupants?
I think those are some of the areas where this, in governance, it's a two-way thing. The governed and those in government. And we really need also to have feedbacks. And that's part of what media, too, is supposed to do, to make the noise.
And I hope this serves the purpose. For instance, would you also recommend some form of resettlement, temporary resettlement of the victims, at least, in the meantime, so that their lives are preserved?
Well, while it is ideal, you also have to consider what are the resources that the state has. That's
what I'm saying. When it's convenient for government doesn't think about the resources. When it's deploying land for resettlement,
I don't think it would be fair to say that. maybe there is need to go into records and see what has been done before, because sometimes we do not need to reinvent the wheel, because you might be reinventing a wrong wheel. So, but if you go into the records and see that something has been successfully done before, then you can actually build on it.
Okay, let's take a break. You're watching Hard Copy on Channels Television. My guest today is the National President, Nigeria Institute of Town Planners. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hard Copy. In this second part of my conversation with town planner Ayinde, we explore the point of lack of prosecution of erring practitioners. And I expressed some concern here as I ask him if the recommendations from his Tribunal of Inquiry into the collapse of the 21-story Ikoyi-Gerrard Terrace will receive much attention if we went by how very little emerged from the coroner's inquest, which recommended the prosecution of the Synagogue Church of All Nations after the collapse of the church's guest house, where more than 100 people died in 2014. As we progress with the conversation, in an interview you granted recently, you said that building collapse continue because erring builders or erring practitioners are not punished. What are your recommendations following your findings in the Ikoyi building collapse?
Well, part of what we recommended first was for government to go back and look at all of the recommendations that were done. What we said was that we were not a magic tribunal. We were not looking at anything new. One of the things that was obvious was that government wasn't following those recommendations. They just piled them and nothing is had. So government has to bring up all those recommendations and begin to implement them. Now, when we say erring practitioners are not just those private sector people. There are also public sector people who have failed to do their work, who have truncated the process, who have glossed over things, who have not followed principles that will produce excellence. I think we just must begin to take responsibility for these things. Because if it appears that you can do something and go scot-free, then you are not about to solve the problem. So that's why we made that recommendation that government should begin to take the right decisions. Take courage to implement the recommendations.
Speaking of which, some years back, a building collapsed in a very popular church in Lagos, where scores of worshippers died, including foreign nationals. 2014. There has been a report that indicted the builders who handled that construction, but I doubt that any punishment has been meted out on those found.
I think they are still in court.
Culpable.
They're still in court. I think that you were referring to the synagogue building collapse. That's still one of the most deeply investigated collapses. And I was at the coroner as commissioner, and even as a former commissioner, I was invited by the Lagos state government to be their witness. So I think some of these things are just about our system. Our legal system takes a long time to run. They've been on that case now, and I don't think we've had the last of it yet. And since we have gone that route until it's completed, we can't say that nothing has been done. That's what I know about it.
The judiciary is the third arm of government. And when public lives are concerned, it's a crime against the state. So we're going back, to the corridors of power.
No. When it's judiciary, they look at the case from all sides. They argue from points of law and things like that. I think when issues come to that level, I don't think I'm the one competent to be making comments, because ordinarily I would think, why should it take so long to work on a case? But it's a judge and a lawyer that will tell you why it takes so long. But let's say that on the synagogue case, I think due process was followed. It's not been concluded, but and I see your point. If it has taken 2014 to now, it's about 8 years, and by September it will be 8 years because it happened in September. Now, if in 8 years we haven't concluded, how are we sure that we're pursuing the right, we're taking the right approach to solving these problems? I think we can do a lot better than that.
And if in 8 years, nothing concrete has come out of the synagogue case, that of the Ikoyi building collapse, are you optimistic that government will summon the will required to ensure that justice is served?
I think the Ikoyi case is more straightforward. I'm waiting for government to. And I've advised media. I mean, one of the media houses had invited me before, trying to find out which of the recommendations was nebulous. We had 28 recommendations. Government approved 26. One of the remaining 2, it amended, agreed with us, but amended to raise the limit. But the last one, they say, is nebulous. But the truth is, I haven't seen that white paper. So, and I think my opinion is that it should be a public document that everyone can see, and then we can make our own judgment. So I'm waiting on government releasing that.
Yeah, so would government officials, would heads roll? Are you optimistic that heads will roll, or this will be mired in bureaucracy yet again?
Well, it will be up to the government to implement the recommendations. If they do, some people might be affected. If they do. If they don't, we won't know until the white paper is published.
Or it could just be drowned in the Nigerian factor.
I hope not. I hope not, because that would mean that we're not willing to solve our own problems.
As we wrap up, I'd like to also quote another interview you granted recently where you identified certain states as being, among 1/3 of the states that have not implemented the regional planning law of 1992. What difference would it make, might I ask, if, some states have implemented it and we still have, this incessant cases of building collapse? What difference would it make if the law is domesticated in some other states?
And our building plan is not the same thing as collapse. You can have a plan and you still have a collapse once you are not doing things rightly. But what that law prescribes is that we should have plans for our settlements. Nigerian cities are not planned. Nigerian settlements are not planned. And it's the reason for the confusion. And that is why you will always see us as a global market for urban regeneration. Because every time we are developing slums. Once you don't lay the plan for how the city will grow in a sustainable manner, they will grow in confusion. And then that's when you need to break people's houses because you want to widen the road and things like that. So that's the reason for making that statement that we need.
So if Nigerian cities are not planned, is it because town planners are not allowed the room for expression, or the town planners that we have are not thinking?
No, if Nigerian cities are not planned, it's because we lack visionaries in government. Because what does a plan do? What a plan does is to take you from your current location to your place of vision. So the town planner is waiting for the governor that has a vision. The town planner is waiting for the president of the nation that has a vision. And then the town planner is willing to bring his vision into a blueprint called the plan. So in this circumstance is the National Physical Development Plan, how cities in Nigeria are supposed to develop. Where there are no plans, then anybody can come and demolish anything and replace. So that's why we have to retrace our steps and appreciate that planning helps to curb haphazard development.
So what would you recommend going forward as we close?
Look, I recommend that before people get into governance, they should actually go to School of Leadership. So people become important VIPs in this nation, and you can't trace their trajectory. How did they get there? Until we begin to get people who are getting into positions because they have succeeded in other previous assignments before we begin to make a headway.
Mr. Tonyade, thank you very much for your time, for your diplomacy at times, and for your candor at other times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Where a building has been marked distressed, but the occupants refuse to leave, should the state government apply the rule of forceful eviction and take responsibility for their alternative accommodation? Your answers are welcome on the handle showing on your screen. Join us again next week for another edition of the program. Thank you for watching Hard Copy. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Bye for now.